Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fish Tank. Some exciting stuff today for Minion Masters, alternative master perks. No, they're not here, but they're getting closer. This is something that the devs have been wanting to get into the game for years, and it now seems that it's the time that the 2.0 is at a decent state where they can start building on it and start developing these new features. So, what are alternative master perks? Well, we're going to look at what they are today, and we're going to look at the ideas the devs have for the first stage of the implementation and their first ideas of the kind of perks. And I'm hoping that a lot of people will get involved in this sort of discussion. We are very early days at the moment. There will be more sort of probably an official PTR at some point in the future to test this stuff out. But I thought it was a great opportunity to discuss where we are at the moment. So, master perks. If you're familiar with Minion Masters and the way that the masters work, each master has 3 perks, with the 4th perk being Mana Frenzy. And you unlock the perks during a match based on XP, and you earn XP from the bridges and various other things. So each master has 3 set perks. Now the idea with alternative master perks is that, let's say in an ideal world, let's say each master has 3 sets of 3 perks. So they have 3 options for perk 1, 3 options for perk 2, 3 options for perk 3. And the idea is, at the start of the match, you haven't decided which perks you want. Maybe you've set up like the default perks, but you can adjust them as the match goes, all the way up to that perk unlocking. Once that perk unlocks, then it's locked in. And really the idea behind this is to give some extra depth to matches. Because we know, for example, there's some master perks that are great or not so great, depending on the matchup you find yourself in. So, for example, one of the key crucial examples is something like Ratbo's perk 2, the Mordaka. This removal ability can be incredible if you're playing against an opponent with lots of big units. But the opposite is true. If you're playing against a very cheap deck, then there's very little value you can get out of the Daka. So the idea is, for example, in this situation, you could switch that Daka out for a different perk that could be more beneficial to you. So it really just adds an additional layer of player agency. So, you know, it's going to be confusing for newer players, and it needs to be implemented in the right way. So there's going to be some we'll probably keep the default perks as it is, and then the choices are there for the players to adjust the perks as they want to. So this is really exciting, but of course all these new perks need to be balanced, and that's really the hard part of it. Not only do they have to come up with new perks that make sense within the master's identity, but they need to make sure that they're balanced, because, you know, there's no point having a load of different perks, but there's always one that's just better flat out than all the others, and people are just going to use that. You know, you want to have these perks that are all balanced in different ways, and some are going to be strong where others are going to be weak in the same situation, to make it really feel like making the decision with regards to which perk you're going to choose something that has a real impact on the game. So that's what master perks are, and then we're going to have a look at some examples now as to what they may be. So the first thing we want to look at here is, this is just a screen cap from a little video that FDM put together, of course the Minion Masters developer. So the idea here is that you just have this little pop-up down here where you've got so this is, he's clicked on his perk 1, and you can see this is right at the start of the match, and he's got 3 options here. Obviously these are just currently existing perks, but the idea here is not to look at the perks, but to look at just the sort of the idea, the UI behind it. So you can set, and you will have this pop up for each of the 3 perks, and then as mentioned, once you hit that perk, that is locked in, you can no longer change it. And there's a bit of a discussion about, should your opponent be able to see the perk you're potentially unlocking? That's another discussion that needs to be had. So in theory, there's a lot of cool things here, but there are some very specific things that need to be thrashed out a little bit. Okay, so let's have a look now at the perks. And I'll put a link to this document that was in the Discord today that FDM shared, so you guys can check it out if you want to, because I know it's not ideal to watch it on a video, but I thought it would be interesting to cover it. So we've got, I think, one new perk here for each of the masters. And remember that the alternative perk is effectively replacing a specific perk. So if we have a look at the first example here, this is for Diona. Where it says mana, that's how much the actual ability perk costs, which we can see a little bit further down here. But these little coloured boxes here are the number of the perks. So for example, Diona, this is replacing her perk 2. So the current perk 2 is the Ruffles that gives you the vials to either give XP, healing, or mana. So the idea here is instead of that, you get what's called the Black Potion perk. So every 15 minutes, in the same way, sorry, every 15 seconds, in the same way that Ruffles did it before, he will run to pick up an enemy, a vial from where an enemy minion died. And we know that that's only restricted to your side and the bridges. If Ruffles picks up that, he turns into a werewolf. So that's obviously very different to the regular perk 2. And again, like on paper, you think, wow, that sounds pretty disgusting. You're getting basically a free werewolf every 15 seconds from perk 2 onwards. But of course, there's a couple of caveats to that. Firstly, something has to die on your side of the field. So if you're pushing, and this is something that the real top Diona players will do, is they'll allow stuff to come onto their side of the field to die, so it generates those vials. So not only have you got to have stuff dying over there, also you've got to have Ruffles surviving to collect this, and we know Ruffles is very, very weak. So that's the first example of an alternative perk, the Black Potion for Diona. Right, let's have a look at one for Ratbo. So as I mentioned before, this is the perk 2, which is the Mordaka. So the replacement for that is called the Squeak Attacks. Remember, these are just kind of ideas, but they're fleshed out ideas. They're not necessarily balanced as such. So it's really interesting if you guys can let us know in the comments, what do you think about these ideas? Do you have any ideas of your own? Because, you know, all we're looking at here is one additional perk for each masters. Ideally, we'll have multiple different perks for multiple different perks. So that's a lot of extra work for the devs. So what we might find is when they implement it, we might just have 1 or 2 extra perks for the masters, and then maybe we'll roll out going forward getting more and more. Right, so the Squeak Attack for Ratbo. Scrats summoned by Ratbo's perks spawn as burrowed. So remember, that's his perk 1, where you're generating the scrats coming from the tower when you spawn minions. Burrowed are untargetable, cannot take damage. They unburrow when they're in melee range of an enemy, and their first attack deals 25 extra damage. So the idea here is, in a situation, like I said, where the Daka is not really of much use to you, you're instead switching to this, which is giving you more sort of trickle value, a little bit of damage, and more pressure on the bridges. Right, next up is Tronvir. So this is Tronvir's perk 1. And this is called Runic Attunement. So remember, the way Tronvir works at the moment is you get the 3 runes cycling on a timer. So the idea here is, instead of that, you get the runes based on the mana you've spent on certain cards. So you can kind of choose or prioritize which of the runes you want. So each time you spend 25 mana on minion cards, you get a rune of the Frost rune. Each time you spend 20 mana on spell cards, you get the rune of Ancestry. And each time you get 15 mana on building cards, you get the Wind rune. So that's rather than just cycling through getting one of each. Here you can specify. So, you know, if you've got a minion only deck, you're going to get a lot of the rune of the Frosts, as opposed to just one every 3 cycles. And of course, there's other ways that the perks are linked to other perks, so we have to think about, how does this affect the perk 2? I'm assuming that the perk 2 will be the same, but you'll just get, instead of the cycling value from the runes, you'll get whatever runes value you're using. Right, next up we have one for Morelia. So this is her perk 1, which is her Book of the Dead. Rites of the Dead. Add a random one-use book page on top of your deck every 18 seconds. Okay, so I think that the cooldown is less than the regular book, but you're getting a random one-use book. Not really sure I understand exactly why you would want to do that, but it seems like you're just getting more value from her. And then the question is, how does that affect her perk 2? Unsure. Right, Mordar, Tomb of the Deathless. So this is perk 1, so this is replacing just the normal tombstone. Add a one-use Tomb of the Deathless card to your deck every 30 seconds. So your tombstone is being replaced by a Tomb of the Deathless. What does that do? Well, as we can see here, enemy minions that die, they're resurrected after 5 seconds under your control with 50% health and damage. They deal 20% of max HP damage to this. So this tombstone basically has the Rendrath ability. So instead of the minions rezzing at the tombstone with HP, depending on how much health the tombstone has, I believe they resurrect where they died after 5 seconds. But as with the things that Rendrath revive, they has 50% health and damage. I don't know if they're cursed or not. It doesn't specify here. Maybe that could be something that we can try to get clarified. So, different tombstone. Instead of reviving back where the tombstone is, revives where they die. And the Sepulchre of the Deathless, nailed it. That's basically the perk 3 version of the Tomb of the Deathless. So it's the big Tomb of the Deathless. So it just has more health. So you could probably interact with that, stun it, just like you can with a normal one. So that's a different sort of idea. So of course, the resurrection, the minions reviving are less valuable, but they're reviving on the enemy side, which you could argue is more valuable. So that's an interesting choice there. Right, next up we have one for Milloween, the Zanian Spellbook. So this is a replacement for her perk 2, which is currently the Arcane Missiles. So, sometimes those Arcane Missiles are really, really powerful. I mean, often they are, to be honest. The fact that they're cheap, they're free, and they can get so much value. So you'd have to really think about whether you want to have an alternate perk here. So, add the Zanian Spellbook card to Milloween's deck every 20 seconds. And as we can see here, reveal 4 spells. This is the ability of the Spellbook. Cast 1 of them and discard the rest. It costs 2 less mana. So that's kind of like the way that Morelia's Book of the Dead works, where you get 4 pages, you choose one of them, and then the rest get discarded. So here you'll get 4 random spells, cast 1, discard the rest, it costs 2 less mana. So you're in a situation there where you're saying, if you're choosing this, you're going away from the guaranteed value of her perk 2 to more randomness, but potentially could be really valuable. Right, next up we have Apep, perk 1. Now we know how strong Apep is, so an alternative perk for Apep, perk 1 or perk 3, they need to be pretty good to make people consider to ever use them. So his idea here is the Slave Driver. So instead of getting a free 2 mana card, you get Slitherbind every 15 seconds. Well, Slitherbind is a 2 mana card, so similar value there, but of course you're not getting the randomness out of it. Slitherbind are pretty damn strong at the moment. We're seeing those in decks even that are not Slither-based decks. The Slitherbind are the small, little Slither guys. And this could work really well if you have a Slither Sacrifice deck, since you're getting these free Slithers. I don't know if you get this as a Slitherbind card, or they auto-play from your tower. I don't know if they're discounted, because you remember perk 1 normally is a 0 cost 2 mana card, whereas this looks like it could be a 2 cost 2 mana card, but it's a guaranteed Slitherbind. So interesting there. But that looks like the kind of perk that might be very, very, very tightly tied into a specific deck. So that might be something that you say, I build this deck, I'm just always going to use this perk. It doesn't matter what else is going on. It's not like a reactive perk. So some different kind of perks here, which kind of makes it sort of interesting. Right, next up we have Valorian, Strength in the Light. So this is his perk 2. Now remember, Valorian's perk 1 is Searing Light. Perk 2 is the heal, the Holy Light. So this says, each time a minion you control is healed for 25% health, give it Rage. So I have some questions about that, because of course, you know, where is this healing coming from? Is this just healing outside of Valorian's perk, because we're talking about removing the healing from his perk 2 if you're switching to this one? So a few questions about this one, and I know some people in the Discord have had a good discussion with the devs about this, so you probably have these questions. I haven't had a chance to catch up on the full discussion. So if you have had these questions and you have had answers, let me know in the comments. Right, next up, King Puff. So this is perk 2 for King Puff, and remember, King Puff's perk 2 currently is the gifts, the royal gifts, where you get the buffs for your units. So the idea of this is called the Mimic Magic. Whenever an unbuffed minion you control deals damage to another minion, copy one of their buffs. So this is quite a proactive ability, because of course this is only going to be beneficial if you're playing someone who has a deck with various buffs in it. Buffs we're talking about like Giant Growth from the Shrooms, Rage from Volko, Revelry, all that kind of stuff. So if you're playing against a deck with those kind of buffs on the enemy units, this could be good for you. But of course, you might queue into a deck that has no sort of inherent buffs like that, and then you wouldn't choose this. Right, next up we have Endless Rage. Now, Endless Rage is a perk 3 Volko. And remember, currently, perk 3 Volko is, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's where you get the Berserker Rage on your melee minions from the Embers. So the idea here is, instead of getting that, you get this Endless Rage card added to your deck. And as you can see here, Endless Rage, it's a 0 mana card. Gain 10 mana over 10 seconds. Remember, this is a one-use card. Gain 10 mana over 10 seconds. So basically, during that period of time, your mana increase rate, gain rate is going to go way up. Spawn both Embers on the bridges. Embers are not consumed while Endless Rage is active. So what that means is that they're always going to be there. So anything that goes over the bridge for you at that time is going to get Rage. So of course this is a one-time only perk. So the idea is you have this big increase in mana. You get this big increase in Rage buffs. And then hopefully you make something work with it. And if you don't, you don't. And we know that those one-time perks can be really powerful, but in the late game, if you don't influence the game enough, then you're basically perkless or perk 3-less at that point. So think about like Morelia. She gets that huge dragon with the breath, can change the game, can win the game. But in a late game, if it goes on after that, that perk has come and gone, effectively no perk 3. Right, next up we have one for Setsu. Setsu, of course, always on people's lips at the moment with regards to a rework, a rebalance or something. But here we see air support. So this is her perk 3. So perk 3 currently is the stunning laser, the very, very strong with the reload. So this perk 3, air support, after using perk 1, which is her blast entry where she jumps into the field, Setsu gains a one-use airstrike ability, which is discarded when she returns to the tower. So kind of similar to how Wrecked gets his one-punch blast, similar but not quite. And the air support, it's a 1 mana spell. Mark an enemy within 20 range. And I'm not sure, are we just marking it, or are we marking it? Is that like the marked mechanic, the keyword, giving ranged units extra damage to it? Unsure. Mark an enemy within 20 range of wherever she is. Setsu stops attacking. After 2 seconds, if Setsu is still alive, a Hellfire lands on the target from Setsu's direction. Costs 1 mana. So Hellfire is the TAS ability. When you get the plane that comes across and does the line of damage, does, I don't know, 180 damage, something like that. It's pretty strong. So that's a very different use to her perk 3, and we know how powerful her perk 3 is. So this is a perfect example of how, if you're going to say, listen, this is an alternative to perk 3, you got to make it good, right? Or you got to nerf the current perk 3. Right, next up, Mass Illusion. So Wrecked, am I covering this with my face? Almost. I think I might just, why we just do the end of this, because I can't scroll down anymore. I shall just disappear. There we go. Right, Mass Illusion. So Wrecked, this is perk 3 Wrecked, which is the one punch blast currently. So the idea is you replace that with add a one-use Mass Illusion card to your hand every 20 seconds. What does that do? It's a 1 mana spell. Create an illusion of up to 10 closest of the power tower. This is your power tower. 10 closest minions you control in your arena in the opposite lane. So if you've played, do we still have the Illusions Mayhem? There was or is an Illusions Mayhem where you just get illusions of everything when you spawn it. So this seems like that is going to be very similar to that. An illusion is basically a weak version of the card that explodes, like an illusory cleaver, for example. And one thing I think they clarified is that illusions don't have the on-death ability that the real one has. So something like a wizard puff, the illusory wizard puff would not have the on-death that a normal wizard puff would have. Just part of the balance of it, I guess. Right. So remember, this is not a one-time only thing. This is every 20 seconds. So this is... Whereas the regular perk 3 is more about Wrecked on the field and Wrecked getting direct value, this is more about getting value from the stuff that you have on there. Of course, the more things you have on the field, the more value you can get from this, up to 10 illusions. Illusion and real unit placement is random. So I think what that means is you've got, say you've got your 10 units on there, you'll have 10 illusions spawn, and then they'll randomly be switched with the real ones. So you can't tell which ones are going to be the real ones and which not. So that's kind of cool. Right, let's have a look at Stormbringer now. Cloud Cover. So this is Stormbringer perk 2. Perk 2 is the current marksmanship perk, where Stormbringer gives marksmanship to all of your ranged units, which is really such a key part of the Stormbringer identity and the deck building behind it. So changing this would definitely require changing your deck building philosophy for Stormbringer. So perk 2, add a 1-use cloud cover card to Stormbringer's deck every 25 seconds. And what does cloud cover do? It's a 1 mana card. Lift a non-mythic minion on a cloud. Give it flying. Cannot move for 10 seconds. As well as giving it marksmanship. So instead of the regular perk 2 that buffs all of your ranged units, this is specifically targeting one specific unit. So let's say, let's think about an Annihilator. So you suddenly have a flying Annihilator. Cannot move for 10 seconds. Can it attack during that? Doesn't specify no, so we assume so. Does it only fly for the 10 seconds? I don't know. See, there's quite a lot of questions we have with this. And again, let me know if you can figure out exactly how they work from the description. Maybe I'm not interpreting it correctly. Or if you've had this discussion with the devs. Right, and then finally, Ravager. So this is perk 2 for Ravager, which is currently the Feeding Frenzy, I think it's called, where the units that drop under 50% health get haste. Is it 50? Something like that. There's a threshold where your damaged units get haste. That potentially can be replaced by something called Overpower. When you play a melee minion card that costs 5 or more, melee minion, 5 or more, one of them gets an empowered attack. So I think when they specify one of them gets an empowered attack, I think that means like if you spawn something that has multiple minions within it, you don't just get all of them with a big beasting extra attack, just randomly one of them. So when you play a melee minion card that costs 5 or more, one of them gets an empowered attack. First attack against a minion deals 200. So of course, if you're playing that on random, on cards with multiple minions, you might not be able to guarantee the value, whereas this, if you're playing it on something like a Succubus, suddenly you get a Succubus who does a huge first attack. But it looks like it's only that first attack. So, again, kind of an interesting one. And you'd maybe react to that depending on what what units they have and what units you have as to whether that's better than your Feeding Frenzy that you already get. Right, okay. I know that was a lot of reading, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the sort of thing that the devs are thinking about. And there's a lot of discussion, I think, that needs to be had regarding this. Hello. And that discussion kind of starts now. So I would love to hear from you in the comments. Let me know, what do you think of, firstly, the idea of alternative master perks? Do you think that adds extra excitement, extra player agency, extra interest to the game? Or do you think it's not needed? Do you think it's too complicated? You know, there's always, not necessarily everyone thinks the same thing, so it's always nice to have that discussion to hear what you think about the changes. And then specifically, what do you think about some of the changes? Do some of them make sense? Do some of them not make sense? Do some of them sound broken AF? Do some of them sound like you would just choose to never really use it? Like, there's a lot of different things here. And of course, this is just the start. This is the ideas that the devs have at the moment for maybe the first rollout. So as I mentioned, we're not going to suddenly have all masters going from 3 perks to 3 sets of 3, overall 9 perks to choose from. That's going to be too much to sort of get into the game at once, from various different viewpoints, specifically from balance. So we're probably going to see this sort of trickle out, and I'm not sure what the timeline is with regards to this, but we're going to see it trickle out. We'll maybe have this implemented where the masters get 1 alternative perk, and we'll see how that goes, get that into a balanced state. Maybe then we'll roll out the next lot and so forth. So it's not going to be a case of we go from no perks to full alternative perks. It's going to be a process, but hopefully going through the process makes it less daunting for newer players to suddenly have 3 times the amount of perks to learn. They just got these extra perks. And of course, you know, if this perk stuff is a little bit too, if you're a newer player and you think, oh god, how am I going to be making these decisions? Just stick with the basic perks and see how you get on. But it definitely, from somebody that's played the game a lot, and there's a lot of veteran players, hopefully this will encourage people to stay around with the game, and maybe some of the older veterans that have not been playing for a while will come back and get involved in this. So there's some cool stuff going on for sure. And also other things as well. Don't forget we've got the, and I'm not sure what the timeline is for this, but we've got the new bridge rules coming in. So if you remember, and I've got a video about this somewhere on my channel, where the old bridge rules, where you could place units directly on the bridge, where you could take units with collision, are coming back based on the feedback that the community gave to the devs via the survey. But they're not going to be quite the same. There's going to be sort of a timer involved, so you can't take a bridge immediately. You've got to be on the bridge for a certain amount of time. So again, that should add more interest. I think it will definitely be a buff to control decks and a nerf to aggro decks, which I think the game kind of needs a little bit. It's a little bit one-dimensional in a lot of the decks. So yeah, lots of cool stuff coming from Minion Masters. Don't forget, and I've told you this a million times before, it's now available on Android. If you've got a compatible Android device, you can play on your phone right now. And you can link it to your Steam account, so you can use your Steam progress on your phone and vice versa. Hopefully in the future, Xbox will be involved in the cross-platform side of things with regards to cross-progression. We already have cross-play, of course, which is a cool thing. You can play with your friends on all different platforms. That's a fun time. But anyway, don't want to go on for too much longer. Just give you a reminder to, if you're enjoying the content here, it really puts a smile on my face if you do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything Minion Masters related. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and I would love to speak to you in the comments. Let me know, what do you think about alternative master perks? My name's Bad as a Fish, and I'll see you again soon here in the fish tank.